Scare Me is a brand new Shudder original, and this is about a man who goes to this like getaway place, this cabin in the woods kind of, and he goes there to write. He's a writer, he's an aspiring writer, and he runs into this woman who is a very famous writer. And she comes over to his house when there's a power outage, or his cabin, or whatever this is. And she comes over and is like, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't you tell me? Why don't we exchange scary stories? Why don't we try to scare each other? And when that happened, I was like, oh, this is going to be an anthology movie. Cool. Like, I love anthologies. I'm down. But it's not an anthology. But it kind of is-ish. It's an interesting spin on the anthology subgenre. So what we got going on here is it's like the Midnight Society. If the Midnight Society, Are You Afraid of the Dark? It would be like that if we never cut to the actual footage. Or like The Princess Bride, when the guy's reading the kid the book. If we never actually cut to the footage, it's just them telling each other scary stories without actually seeing the scary stories. And it's done very comedically. I mean, it's mostly comedy horror. There are a little more serious elements to it, especially at the end. But it mostly, deals with comedic elements. Overall, I think what is going to be the factor here of whether you like this film or not is if you like the characters. If they're landing for you, if you find the guy or the girl charming or funny, or you want to spend an hour and 40 something minutes with them telling ghost stories or werewolf stories or whatever to each other in a kind of a comedic way. Now, these stories are not polished. These stories are not fluid. It's not like he's telling a really well thought out story. Not at all. He's making it up on the spot. So there's a lot of comedic elements to that where she's kind of critiquing his work as it goes along. It's almost like a sit down right along. And he's kind of, spitballing it the whole time. And then it kind of has some fantasy elements to it where his story starts to kind of come alive in that moment when he's landing the story. He's kind of tripping over himself during most of his story, but then when he's kind of hitting his stride and he's having a moment where it's working, then the story starts to kind of come to life, where he's telling a werewolf story, so his hand starts to become a werewolf's hand, but that only happens a very few amount of times within the film. But other than that, it's all straightforward, two people in a room telling each other scary stories. There are a couple more people who entered the film. One in particular, a pizza delivery guy, who I thought was very charming and very funny, very likable. He's probably my favorite part of the film. But I did like every character. I really liked the woman. I thought she was super funny. She's kind of a bitch, but and there's a lot of woke politics that she's kind of spewing onto him at times, and he's rejecting those notions and kind of pushing back against those. So there's a little bit of a social commentary there about more of the woke attitude, and kind of the other pushback kind of style of why are you being like this? Why are you bringing up that I'm a white guy? Stuff like that. So I thought that was pretty cool. It wasn't just in your face, agenda driven. It was kind of relevant to the times, but in a little more nuanced kind of way. And I dug that about it. But yeah, I liked it. I wouldn't say I loved it, but I did enjoy it, and I could see a lot of people finding this boring. I could find a lot of people being like, what the fuck is this? I don't want to sit here and watch two people try to tell each other scary stories in a very haphazard, unpolished, comedic way where he's kind of just trying to figure things out as he's talking and trying to impress this, really well-known author with his amateurish storytelling. But I did like the performances, and I thought the comedy and the way that everything was presented was pretty cool. So overall, I was a fan, and I definitely would recommend it. Obviously, if this sounds like something you would be into. If that doesn't sound good to you, maybe check it out for 5 or 10 minutes. And if you're not feeling the characters, shut it off, because you're not going to like the movie. The whole movie is the characters. The characters, the characters, the characters. There's no real story. I told you the story. There's not going to be many surprises, much else. Maybe at the end, but besides that, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's them sitting in a dark room telling each other scary stories, and it never cuts to like, actual footage of their stories being told. So it's a much different take. But I appreciated it. It's low budget, but it doesn't feel it too bad. Like, the production value is good enough that it feels like a legit feature film. I recommend it. I think it's a cool flick. Let me know if you watch it. Adios.